tonight's guest is Benjamin Wallace, who is the New York Times best-selling author of The Billionaire's Vinegar, as well as The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto. He has been a features writer at New York Magazine and a contributing editor at Vanity Fair. So we're going to just chat. I have some questions for him, which he does not know in advance what they are, which is always fun. And we'll take questions from you guys. Okay, so for those of you who have not read this book, there is a mystery at the heart of it. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but basically, you spent 15 years trying to identify Satoshi Nakamoto, the person or people behind cryptocurrency Bitcoin. What was it about this story that captured your imagination enough to devote more than a decade to researching and writing about it?
So in 2011, I randomly was assigned by Wired magazine to write about this new thing, Bitcoin, which was, I think it launched in early 2009. I'd never heard of it. But he mentioned Silk Road, which at the time was making the news as like this dark web black marketplace, and Bitcoin was the coin of the realm there. And he said, but no one knows who created this thing. And so I was really interested in the idea of Bitcoin as he explained it to me, which was this money that was different than any money that had existed before. It was free from banks, it was free from governments, it sort of operated on its own. And the thing that really got me though was this mystery, because like how can there be this increasingly popular technology that no one knows who invented it? And I was an English major, I was not a tech person, and so the things that grab me in stories tend not to be the technical details, but the kind of just anything that makes a story good, and this mystery seemed really remarkable. And so I did that article. I tried to discover who Satoshi Nakamoto was. I thought when I started working on the article that, no big deal, I'll discover who Satoshi Nakamoto is. I did not. I named 4 people who were sort of potential candidates because they had previously come up with ideas for digital money. But the article comes out, then a bunch of other journalists come out with articles naming like different people as Satoshi Nakamoto. They were all wrong. So I actually felt, good that I had not like bet on a single, I had not like pinned my article's fate on a single candidate. But the years go by, every few years someone would float a new candidate. In 2014, there was like Newsweek put a guy on the cover of the magazine and said, we've discovered Bitcoin. Discovered the inventor of Bitcoin. And unlike all the other dumb journalists, the Newsweek journalist had the brilliant idea that like maybe Satoshi Nakamoto is not a pseudonym, because everyone at that point assumed Satoshi Nakamoto is not a pseudonym. But this journalist went through like naturalization records and found that there actually was a person named Satoshi Nakamoto, and surely this must be the inventor of Bitcoin. And it was not. And the media did like an OJ trial encampment on the guy's lawn. He lived with his mother near Pasadena. And there was like an OJ style, like slow speed car chase along the freeways of Los Angeles with because the guy got in the car of one, the AP reporter who said he'd buy him a free lunch. And all the other, jealous journalists got in their cars and started chasing them, and they're like live tweeting hashtag Bitcoin chase, hashtag Satoshi. Anyway, the point is this just like kept happening. And I would every now and then, because I'd been one of the journalists who wrote about it early, I would receive emails from people saying I'm Satoshi. And so late 2015, I got one claiming that, it wasn't saying I'm Satoshi, but it was claiming to be the hacked emails of an Australian computer scientist named Craig Wright, who they said was Satoshi. At the time, I kind of ignored it because the subject header said not virus scanned, it had one of those things, and I was like, this is just phishing or something. And then Wired and Gizmodo, which was a tech blog at the time, both published big stories saying we found Satoshi. He was not Satoshi. On and on. So I was kind of keeping tabs on it. It wasn't like this was, I had a job. This wasn't my full-time occupation for 15 years, but I could never kind of let go of my curiosity about who could this be. And I just sort of watched from the sidelines as a bunch of other reporters, tried and did not succeed. And so late 2021, I get another one of these emails. This one's like, I know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, Elon Musk. And the guy made like a plausible case for why Elon Musk could be Satoshi, but not much of a case for Elon Musk being Satoshi. And so I kind of disregarded it, but it got me sucked back into really thinking about this. And at the time, Bitcoin was booming again. It had gone through a bunch of boom and bust cycles, and it was going mainstream in a way that it never had before. Like Matt Damon's doing Super Bowl commercials for Bitcoin for crypto companies. Larry David's doing them. Like it's really going mainstream. And so I thought at that point that this is sort of a mainstream enough topic, and there's this mystery that's even bigger and more important than it was before, because it actually is a technology that now has become kind of important, and that combination would make for an interesting book. And I somehow thought like I would try some new methods to unravel the mystery.
So I'm always interested in the craft of writing and like the process of it. So you said you didn't decide to turn it into a book until well into your years spent researching it. So first of all, how did you keep track of all this? I mean, if you look in the back of this book, there's pages of footnotes of articles that you're referring to and events that happened. That's a long time to be organized over something with so many different like tendrils and directions. And at what point did you decide, okay, this is a book? Was that your decision? Was it a publisher? Was it, who made that decision?
So I had my original article. I had my files from that reporting that I did then. I'm kind of an email pack rat, so I had not gotten rid of any of the emails I'd received over the years, like the 2015 one or any of the others. And but most of the footnotes you'll see in there are things that I either dug up or redug up in 2022, 2023, 2024 when I was working full time on this. And then at that point, it is a challenge to keep it all manageable. But
and so when did you decide it would be a book?
So I decided it would be a book in early 2022, because again, crypto's like going mainstream in a way it never had before, because of this Elon Musk case that was sort of got me refocused on it, and I began to just look at all the efforts to unmask this person over the years. It now seemed really crazy that this even existed. I mean, it's just there's nothing really like it in modern technology, where there's an important technology and no one knows who invented it. And so I think I sent a one-page email to my agent and asked, if he thought there was a book, and he was encouraging enough for me to kind of develop it further, and then I developed a 30-page proposal, and then we took it out to publishers.
So there's a quote somewhere in the book that basically says, if somebody's trying that hard to remain anonymous, maybe you should leave them alone. Did that nag at you at all? Like, was there like your conscience like, maybe I shouldn't do this? Or what was your rationale for forging ahead?
Sure. I mean, I definitely thought about that while I was working on the project, and I'd thought about it over the years because it was a kind of common refrain in the Bitcoin community. Like, a lot of people in the Bitcoin world do not think, Satoshi Nakamoto should be identified, because it's sort of counter to the spirit of Bitcoin, which is it's decentralized, right? There's no one person in charge. It's controlled by the crowd, right? The peer-to-peer network of computers that on which it runs. And my feeling was always that until you know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, you can't evaluate whether or not it's important or ethical or not ethical to for the world to know that, because let's say that, just as a hypothetical, Satoshi Nakamoto is like the Chinese Communist Party, and Bitcoin is a plot to destabilize the dollar as the global reserve currency. Then it's probably pretty important to know like that's who invented Bitcoin. And so until you know it, you can't just decide on the unknown Satoshi's behalf that they deserve to remain unknown. I also think it's not, it is like this is an invention that got sort of placed in the public square by someone and affects the world.
Okay, so let's do a little econ lesson here. Spoken from someone who knows nothing about econ. what does Bitcoin accomplish that traditional currency doesn't accomplish? And what are the conditions needed to make it more viable in the coming years?
That's a hard question. What does Bitcoin?
You can basically say anything you want.
Exactly.
And we'll all be like, oh, great.
The first part is like, what does Bitcoin accomplish that traditional currency
Yeah.
doesn't? Okay, so, I mean, some people would say like not much. I mean, that would be
Right.
like a skeptic's answer. So, from the standpoint of the the strongest proponents of Bitcoin from the beginning were libertarians, and so from a libertarian perspective, like a currency that is not dependent on a government or bank is just in and of itself like virtuous. But one of the things when Bitcoin launched, there was a headline from the Times of London embedded in the first block of the blockchain, which is the sort of constantly updating ledger of Bitcoin activity. And that headline said, "Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks." So it's one of the few clues we have as to like what Satoshi's motivation might have been. And this was happening, on the heels of like the financial crisis. And so, if you are someone who really does not believe in like money printing and like government manipulating money supply to achieve like economic and political ends, then a money that a government cannot do that to is attractive. And one of the features of Bitcoin is that its money supply was locked in from the beginning at 21 million coins, which are sort of are released at a regular cadence, and will, I think, all have been released by like 2142. But it's kind of like an asymptote, and like there's most of them are already out in the world, but they will be completely distributed by them. So that's what would be the kind of strong Bitcoin maximalist argument for it. And then there's like practical things that people thought it might be good for, most of which have not panned out so far. One of them was cross-border remittances, like immigrants sending money back to their families, where there are like these exorbitant fees on them, and this would be maybe a cheaper, faster, less regulated way for people to do that. Another was like that it might enable microtransactions. So I don't even know if people still think that would be a good thing, but back in the day when like media was sort of beginning to experience economic problems, people thought maybe the solution for media is going to be micropayments. So you could just be sort of you click on one article, whoever published the article gets like a penny or a fraction of a penny, but it kind of would unbundle media, and it would be a way to financially support media just on the basis of like this article and that article instead of like this magazine or that newspaper.
Does the current administration make the future of Bitcoin more, more likely to flourish? I mean, it seems like it would, but I'm just curious. What do you think?
I do think so, in that like Bitcoin has been declared dead like many times. I mean, my 2011 article for Wired was headlined "The Rise and Fall of Bitcoin," and there's a website called like Bitcoin Obituaries that has more than 400 articles or examples of articles that have headlines like that, or that are like, Bitcoin is finally toast. But it's like, because it would like boom and bust, and it was so volatile that it made sense that like how can this thing possibly go on? And the fact that even without the kind of turbo boost of the current administration, the fact that it has survived and gotten bigger and bigger and more valuable even before that, and then you add in the current administration. I actually happen to think that the last administration was a little too conservative, and there were sort of reputable big crypto companies that were just asking for clarity of regulation, and they weren't getting it. And so the upside of the current administration's policies is, I think there will be, coming out of it, there will be some clear regulations. On the other hand, I mean, I don't think, the administration's doing Bitcoin any favors by associating it with a lot of disreputable political activity and corruption.
Right. Right. Okay, so let's talk about the community of people that are in this Bitcoin world that you talk about in a lot of detail. So you describe them throughout the book as a motley mix of libertarians, nerds, zealots, coders and developers, oddballs, and brilliant scientists with a very occasional woman thrown in. How has this community changed over the years, and with whom did you identify, if anyone, as you spent time with them? And I also wanted to know, like, were you perceived as an outsider, not to be trusted, or were you welcomed into this community?
I mean, the difference between 2011 and 2022 is quite significant in terms of like how I was, viewed and perceived, and how journalists in general, were perceived not only in this community. And so in 2011, I mean, everyone involved with it was an oddball. Everyone involved with it was like, had no more business than anybody else. Like, we were all noobs. And so I was like hanging out at Bitcoin meetups in New York, and I mean, I had as much seniority as anyone basically, and so it was such a new thing. And did I identify with anybody? Not really, because I was not a technical person, I was not a libertarian, but to me it was just a fascinating story. It was just such a weird subculture, and it was such a conceptually interesting technology, and it was interesting to try to understand this thing that was really quite hard to understand. And so it was, back then I was actually, I felt quite welcomed into at least like that local Bitcoin community. And when I called up the people who were the kind of would become the usual suspects as to who might be Satoshi, like this guy Nick Szabo, and a guy named Wei Dai, and then there was a guy named Hal Finney. I didn't call him up, we emailed, but like they all were very responsive, because this was some of the first like mainstream attention that this fringe utopian project was getting. Hal Finney was in sort of late stage Lou Gehrig's disease, and so he responded using eye gaze software. And so in 2022, it was a very different story. Like, I mean, the whole, the media had lost a lot of trust for it in the world. Additionally, there had become kind of this huge schism between like, red-pilled tech people and sort of like the lamestream media, that kind of thing. So there's all of that. Then there's the fact that over the past 11 years, there had been so many kind of debacles in attempting to name Satoshi. Like, there was the Newsweek thing, there was the Craig Wright thing, and Craig, the guy, the Australian computer scientist that I got the email about, he ended up suing like a lot of people. And so it was sort of a tainted project. And then add on to that the fact that there was almost a religious belief that it was unethical to try to identify Satoshi. And I would say like I got a much cooler reception.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of other reporters who are also trying to identify Satoshi. Did you feel a rivalry with them, like you were kind of like these opponents in this like decades-long scavenger hunt? And do you feel like now that you've got this, like, you won?
I mean, at the time I was working on the book, there wasn't really, like, I didn't feel competition, because everyone had kind of like shot their shot. Like, there'd been all these attempts. Like, when I first was working on the story for Wired, I heard that the New Yorker was working on a piece at the same time, and I was completely competitive and, concerned that like they were gonna beat me to the punch and they were gonna identify Satoshi Nakamoto, and they did identify him and they were wrong. So then I was like, okay. And then, so when I started working on the book like proper in 2022, I definitely, I would say I had some hubris. Like, I thought like, I can do this, but I also thought at a minimum, I have some ideas for how to approach this differently. And so at a minimum, I can come up with like some new wrong answers instead of the same old wrong answers. And that was kind of my consolation of like, what worst case scenario, I'll just come up with like some better wrong answers.
So between this and Billionaire's Vinegar, you're clearly a man who enjoys a deep dive. You like to go, in a lot of detail. How, over the course of your journalistic life, like how do you choose what's worthy of your attention?
I mean, so, sometimes it's what does my editor decide is worthy of my attention, but the stuff that like I kind of pitch and am most passionate about, and I'm sure I could probably identify some common threads, but it's just like what excites me. And so it tends to be, I love mysteries, I love sort of strange subcultures, I love it's things that sort of have like a little bit of like a comic edge. Like in The Billionaire's Vinegar, it was like, billionaires spending crazy amounts of money on wine that there was no way was going to taste good because it was like 200 years old. So there's sort of the kind of human folly of like, rare wine collecting. And I did a story for New York Magazine a couple years ago about like this crazy treasure hunt that took place in the Rocky Mountains. I mean, there's usually like larger than life obsessed characters, involved. And certainly in this treasure hunt, I mean, there was like really obsessed, like 5 people died, like people got divorced and went bankrupt. I mean, it was just like so much craziness happened. And so yeah, craziness in a colloquial sense, like I like that in the story.
Mm-hmm. So who is your typical reader of this book?
I mean, I tried to do this with The Billionaire's Vinegar also. Like I try to write in a way that is both credible to like insiders. Like I'm not writing just like, sort of, like I wanted it to be technically credible to people who actually know the stuff. But my primary hope is that I'm writing a book for not insiders, and that I'm sort of translating this esoteric topic for normies such as myself. And so like I can kind of bring them along on my journey from normie to pseudo expert on the topic, So I mean, I kind of think of this and the wine book as like Trojan horse books where you come for the story but you leave like actually understanding a topic that otherwise would be kind of hard to get your head around.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so your book is sitting on what we call the new nonfiction octagon over there. What do you like to read? If you had walked into the store, what section would you gravitate towards?
The new nonfiction. The new nonfiction octagon, of course. And not even if my book wasn't there. I mean, I think that is. I mean, I read fiction also, but that's definitely the first thing, the first place I'm looking.
Got it. Okay, so my last question is, what's next for you?
Well, so I'm back to periodical writing. I mean, writing some pieces right now, like one for New York Magazine, one of The Atlantic, and kind of one of them is adjacent to this book, like thematically, like it is about, I think I can say because it's coming out in a couple days, like it's about extreme privacy. So people who have to go to great lengths to kind of hide from corporate surveillance, because it's actually very hard to keep your data out of databases.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that's about.
Okay, well, does anyone have questions?
I have one that is just, did you ever buy some crypto at the beginning?
So when I was doing the Wired piece, I thought it's very like Bitcoin can be very hard to get your head around. Like, what is this? Like, you can't see it. Like, what do people mean when they say it doesn't depend on a government bank? So I thought I've got to buy some Bitcoin to understand it, and how do you get it? Like, what do you do with it? Where do you store it? So I bought $200 worth of Bitcoin at $17 a coin, and I mean, I'm gonna move around in the story. So right now, I think Bitcoin's like $105,000 a coin, like around there today, maybe. And so I had 12 Bitcoins. 5 of them I used to go to the world's first Bitcoin conference, which was this like rinky-dink, like very rinky-dink 75-person conference in Manhattan in 2011, the summer of 2011. The other 7, and just getting Bitcoin was very cumbersome. Like you had to, I think it took several days to wire the money to a like money transmitter in Iowa, and then another few days for it to go to an exchange in San Francisco, and then another few days to like send some of them back to me, and then I had the rest sent to at the time there were already some like fly-by-night kind of online exchange Bitcoin scandals where like everyone's Bitcoin would just disappear. They'd put it in some online exchange. So I wanted to be super safe, and so I asked like, what's the the most reliable Bitcoin exchange? And at the time, it was this place called Mt. Gox in Tokyo. And so I sent my 7 Bitcoins to Mt. Gox. And Mt. Gox, like 3 years later, implodes in a fireball of like hacks and scandals and bankruptcy, along with my Bitcoins. But I do not like, it's not like, oh, I was going to hold on to those Bitcoins and now I would have $700,000. Like I was, at the time that the exchange imploded, I had to sell order it because Bitcoin had already gone over 1,000. It was back down into the 400s, and I thought like it's going to zero. Like I better I'll get my money out now, and it's the best investment I ever made, $17 to $450 or whatever. So unfortunately, they shut down before I got that money out. But all I would have gotten out was, whatever that works, like $3,500 or something. And unfortunately, there actually was then a bankruptcy process, and I was just kind of like, there's no one's ever going to get any money, so I didn't do the filings in time. And so now some people actually are getting their Mt. Gox money back, but I am not one of them.
There's a horrible story in the book about a guy who threw out a hard drive that ends up now being worth $340 million. Is that right?
I mean, I don't remember it was definitely over 100 million. I don't remember the exact amount.
And
Yeah,
this
it's the guy in
had
Wales.
spent
Yeah.
decades
Mhm.
sifting through landfills to try to find it. It was just the most horrible image.
And he's not alone. I mean, there's a bunch of stories like that. Like,
Yeah.
even when I was working on the story in 2011, there was a guy named Stephen Thomas who had lost I think he had the Bitcoin keys on on a thumb drive, and he had locked himself out and forgot the password. And I think he had used 8 of his 10 attempts before it wiped. And so he was then he was putting it in a safe deposit box to see if eventually technology might be able to get him in. And actually, a couple years ago, it seems like possibly that is going to happen now to his long lost thumb drive. But I mean, he's got hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin out there.
Any other questions?
So, in looking for Satoshi and debunking a lot of people along the way, as an investigative journalist, what was your favorite moment of investigative craft, where you're interviewing, had yielded some great stuff? Your favorite?
I mean, the most exciting moment was when I thought I found Satoshi. And that was when I found this one weird, very, very unusual linguistic quirk. And I thought there's no way this is not Satoshi. And then as I began, it was basically this one word that was used by Satoshi and that had been used by one person on these bulletin boards that were frequented by all the kinds of people who might have invented Bitcoin, called the cypherpunks board back and the cryptography board, these various boards. And this word had only been used one time in 30 years of those boards by someone who actually was a plausible Satoshi candidate. And I just thought, what are the odds? And there was a lot more to the theory as to why I thought it might be him. But that was very exciting, because for 2 or 3 days I was just walking around I know who Satoshi is. I figured it out. Pretty impressive. And needless to say, the plot thickened, and the story there got more complicated.
So there are stories of hackers that taking over some bitcoins, and do you think that hacking is going to be a big issue since all of that?
That hacking is going to be a big issue for Bitcoin. I mean, it is never. Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, it has been, and it's consistently been.
Yeah.
And not to get too dark here, but it actually there's actually been a wave of very scary crime around people who sort of custody their own Bitcoin, meaning they don't put it into Coinbase, the big exchange. They keep it on a thumb drive or whatever. And there's been a wave of kidnappings. And the thing is, when you control the keys, which is basically just a password, a cryptographic, you can imagine what people do to get you to give up the keys. I mean, it's pretty brutal.
Tonight's talk is not just about a Bitcoin, right? It's about a crypto technology and so on and so forth. Now, since the date you mentioned, 2011, and all the central banks treat it as illegal, and people were skeptical or treated it as a speculative gimmick. But now, in recent years, gradually around the world, not only central banks, but also financial institutions are gradually, I don't know how to use the word, but accept this. So my question to you, one, is what drives this change in attitude? And number 2 question is, over the next few years, where do you see the biggest change? In the cross-border transfer, payments system, or as a medium of a change, and more company or commerce online will accept
Right.
crypto or stable coin to in exchange for real goods and services, or as a store of value.
So I'm going to answer this in reverse order. I mean, so when Satoshi Nakamoto launched Bitcoin, he called it a peer-to-peer electronic money, and the clear intention was that it would be a medium of exchange, right? That it would be usable money. And one of the problems with that, at least with Bitcoin and some of the other prominent cryptocurrencies, is their volatility. I mean, they're so volatile. And so you can imagine if you're a merchant and someone pays you in Bitcoin and like half an hour later it's worth like 20% less, that's a problem. You can't, so it's never really been a reliable medium of exchange or money. Having said that, stable coins, right, which are another type of cryptocurrency, may address the volatility thing, but they're also like backed by real assets, right? They're not just like pure cryptocurrency. And Bitcoin really has evolved into a store of value, even a volatile store of value, but a store of value, like digital gold, right? So it's something you can buy, hold, speculate on. And a lot of people have made a lot of money that way, but other people who bought at the wrong time and sold at the wrong time lost money. But as to like the mainstream acceptance of it, I mean, I think it took a long time. I mean, for years there were, naysayers. I mean, I think Warren Buffett called it rat poison. Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan called it like the new tulip bulb. And I think Jamie Dimon still like some of them have not like changed their tune on that. Like I think Buffett also. And but sort of if you can make money from something eventually, like if you're on Wall Street and you can make money from something, you're going to make money from it. And I just think after enough sort of boom and bust cycles, people began to recognize like, okay, maybe this isn't going anywhere, and we should get in on this. And then there was sort of this more a few people with some kind of reputation like invested, and it snowballed from there.
I mean, but is it anything other than a tulip bulb? I mean, as you said, it's too volatile to be a usable currency. I mean, isn't it basically just a legalized speculation? I mean, I ask this partially because, like, my sister-in-law, who works for Grayscale and has more money than I could never imagine, right? Like, clearly believes that it is something else. But she's tried over countless Christmases to persuade me of that, and I still am not entirely sure, other than some kind of quasi-legalized, and I guess soon to be more legalized form of speculation, what it actually is socially.
For sure, I mean there are multiple blockchains, and so there are other ones that maybe have like more diversified uses. Like I mean Ethereum, in particular, like was used sort of the whole like NFT craze, like digital art on the blockchain. A lot of that took place on Ethereum. So I don't think you can't like make a monolithic statement about all of them, but I mean I also think digital gold is a real thing. Like it's a like my father-in-law asked me, like why is Bitcoin worth anything? And I said, why is gold worth anything? And he's like, why does everyone who I ask this question respond with a question? But I mean I do think that's true. It's like why is anything worth anything? If we agree that something is worth something, I mean now you get into like money, philosophy and whatever, but it's true. Like if you I mean there's so many weird things that have been considered to have value over the years. I mean in communist Romania, like Kent cigarettes became like a medium of exchange, and like in prison, like pouches of mackerel are like traded. So I mean, if enough people believe that Bitcoin is worth something, then it's worth something. But it actually does have some, attributes that you can say it's actually better than digital gold, right? Like better than gold. You don't need a vault to store it in. You can transport it across borders without like breaking your back. Like there's actual like ways in which in some ways it's superior to gold. And could it go to zero still? Yes, but I mean I think sort of the network effects of the number of people who already believe it to be worth something and are invested in it being worth something would keep that from happening, unless there were some cataclysmic event. Like one fear for Bitcoin and crypto is that quantum cryptography could suddenly basically make the cryptography involved with Bitcoin and other cryptos useless. I mean, I think a lot of people, even who think quantum cryptography will happen, think it will happen more slowly, and there'll be enough time to sort of, change the way Bitcoin wallets work, and that it won't be an issue. But if it happens suddenly, like if it was developed, in some intelligence agency like last year, but they just haven't like used it yet, and then suddenly they were to decide that we're going to drain every Bitcoin wallet, I mean, that could happen.
Just following on from that, do you think it's going to be stuck in this kind of eccentric zone, or is it ever going to become mainstream, something that we're all routinely using?
I don't know. I mean, I think to sort of too soon to tell. I mean, the one thing, some of these other chains like Ethereum and Solana and a few others like are more focused on being useful and having like high transaction speed and capacity. But I think it's just hard to say. I mean, the one thing I will say is that AI, I think they started working at MIT on AI in like the 1950s, and for years, for decades, it was like AI is a joke, like nothing's going to happen with AI. AI winter went on for decades, and then suddenly, one thing happened and it completely changed the trajectory for AI. So I think, it could take a while for crypto to find that like magical use case.
Mass buy-in, I guess, is that the key?
I think mass buy-in would be more likely to follow the discovery of like the perfect use case than the other way around.
How confident are you that you identified the right person?
I mean, are you asking me how the book ends?
No, I would have asked that. But
Read the book.
I am confident that I have done an exhaustive investigation into the possibilities.
We actually see some small banks take cryptocurrency as collateral for lending. Now it becomes widespread. The natural asset is still valued into this kind of asset.
Yeah.
Right? You become both.
I mean, I talked to a realtor in my hometown who's received had people who were like, I want to buy that house with my Bitcoin, and they got the seller agreed to it.
Were you paid crypto for the book?
Way too volatile. Cash on the barrelhead.
I have a question. My husband's question are too technical. He's the director of Volatility Institute for NYU. I'm not. My question is, Bitcoin is not like gold in so many ways. It really depends on the central banks in so many ways. How do you view central banks like Fed in the US and other major leading developing and as well as developing countries will do in terms of policy environment for Bitcoin in the coming years?
But I'm not sure what is the involvement of a central bank with Bitcoin?
The central bank, I think they have a role.
No. Bitcoin literally, like, the point of Bitcoin is for the central bank not to have a role. Bitcoin is run on a network of computers volunteered by, just regular people who want to contribute their computers to the network.
That is a production, right? But if it is actually recognized as a currency, that would be regulated and related to the central bank,
Well, you can regulate the, businesses that do stuff with Bitcoin. Like, you can regulate an exchange that is taking like customers' money to buy Bitcoin, but you can't regulate Bitcoin. That's the part of the appeal of Bitcoin, especially to libertarians, is it is unregulatable, it is borderless, it is just anyone with a computer can like join the network and be part of the network and contribute to the running of the network. And the central bank can do nothing about it. And in fact, I think a few years ago, I believe like over 50% of Bitcoin miners, which is just sort of a slightly misleading term for the computers that are part of the network, were in China. And China banned mining. And mining, so, there's like a powerful centralized government that's like, we're gonna take an action. All they could do it was in their country. They could ban Bitcoin mining in China, and Bitcoin mining activity, much of it gravitated to Texas. But a government can't control it. That's a huge part of its appeal.
having studied Satoshi for so many years and knowing probably a piece of his psyche in some way, what do you think his opinion is of all these copycat coins that came out after him?
I mean, one of the things about Satoshi Nakamoto that's made it's sort of a tricky mystery, I think, is how little he revealed about himself, and how, he was very, like, very focused on just, when he communicated with the software community early on, when they were developing it, he just would not say anything personal about himself. Having said that, I mean, some of the few things that he did say that, to your point, is he thought it would be bad for Bitcoin if there were other cryptocurrencies, because again, like network effects, like if you have competition, that's like fewer people who are sort of in your network, and he basically thought there should be one network. So I think he would not be a fan of them.
So in all your research, did you get a chance to talk to different age groups? Because I'm thinking that the older the resistance to change, and you go to the Gen Z that is more about decentralization. And I wonder if you saw a trend or not. And when you in your Gen X and Gen Z, I don't know if you got to talk to
I mean, I mean, strangely, I think some of the people I talked to probably skewed a little bit older, because the communities that Bitcoin probably came out of were these cryptographers in the 90s. And, people who know more about software code than I do, there's an argument that the code itself is done in an older person's style, and that Satoshi might be 70 years old now. So, I mean, it makes sense to me that in general, for sort of more mass adoption outside of the early core users, younger people are going to be, much more receptive and open-minded about it, I would think. If you grow up with it as a thing, it's no longer this kind of head exploding concept of what is how can a string of numbers be money,
Why do you think he stays anonymous?
That's a great question. I mean, one reason, I mean, I'll give you a handful of potential reasons, many of which, or all of which might be not correct, but, so one theory is, I think the theory that is maybe held among Bitcoin superfans is that Satoshi is a benevolent monk who, for the greater good, didn't, want to, because, another thing, Satoshi, is known to hold 1.1 million Bitcoins. So, he's the, I think as of today, I looked, he's the 11th richest person in the world. He's richer than Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. He's, fantastically wealthy. If Bitcoin, 3x's, whatever, I mean, he could be the richest person in the world, which is another reason why I think could be useful to know who he is, given the impact the richest person in the world can have, as we've recently learned. So one reason would be the monk theory. Another reason is it was done inside of an intelligence agency theory. Another one is the he's dead theory. And another one is, early on he did it pseudonymously because, creating a new currency actually might run afoul of some laws. And another theory is that Satoshi is someone who was already extremely rich and so didn't need the money. And it is in some ways probably better for Bitcoin to not be attached to a fallible single human being whom people might not like, or
So your next your current writing is about digital privacy and remaining anonymous. Was that inspired by Satoshi?
I mean, I think not directly, but the fact that I was interested in both this and in Satoshi probably stems from the same thing. But the privacy one, I was researching for a fictional project several years ago, how a recluse, one of the characters was a recluse, and I was researching what tradecraft would a recluse use to be unfindable, and that led me to this kind of digital privacy subculture. But the fact that I was interested in recluses and also interested in Satoshi seems to have something in common.
So I guess when you just winding the clock back when you started your article in 2011, you already had a name. But how confident were you then that there was actually a person behind the name, and where did the name come from? I'm just wondering, like, just thinking out loud, something like this, it seems like could be one person or it could be some sort of collaborative thing across many different people in many places. But then this kind of presupposes there's just one guy who has hooked this whole thing up.
It doesn't presuppose that. I mean, I explore like the group theory, you know, I mean, the argument against it just being like, I mean, it's certainly like a far-flung group is like people can't keep secrets. It's really hard to keep secrets. And that's an argument for it, you know, a possibility being that it was done in an intelligence agency or by like an intelligence agency person who was moonlighting but could not be public about it because it was like, you know, not supposed to be doing that. But what I can say is that Satoshi's public communications, or the vast majority of them, appear to have been written by a single person, according to like statistical, you know, linguistics stylometrists who have, you know, looked at it. So that doesn't mean that maybe the coding was done by a second person, maybe the concept was a third person. I mean, any of that's possible, but I do think outside of an intelligence agency, it's like really hard for a secret to remain secret. Like all it takes is like a relationship to go south, or one person to say like, well, you don't want to spend the money, I want to spend the money. Like I need a new roof on my house, you know. So.
Okay.
All right.
I think that's it. So
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Gail.
yeah, thanks for coming.